Wait, what? When I returned to the shadow stop after shopping at the store, my mother-in-law was nowhere to be found. I checked the timetable and found that the last shadow had left 5 minutes ago. As I was in despair, I received a call from my mother-in-law. Judith, the shadow! Ha ha ha! Too bad for you! You're so inconsiderate to come along on our family trip in the first place. A stranger like you should walk 4 hours to the hotel. Understood? I don't know why I couldn't fight back. I was just so shocked by the fact she hated me so much. My husband and father-in-law were supposed to join us separately. Now that the last shadow had left, I had no choice but to hike for 4 hours along the mountain road to the hotel. I was at a loss when a phone call gave me a glimpse of light. My name is Sandra. I'm 30 years old. I work at a variety shop in a shopping mall. My husband Calvin and I have been married for almost a year. Since we had dated for 3 years and had lived together for 1 year before our marriage, it has been an ordinary couple's life with no major changes. My work has been going well, and I've been promoted to manager since the beginning of this year. The number of regular customers has increased, and some of them even come to the store specifically to chat with me. From the outside, one might say that my life is smooth sailing. However, I have one headache. It's the relationship with my mother-in-law Judith. She's been horrible from the first time I met her. When I visited my in-laws upon our engagement, she looked at me and said, "You can't be the fiancé." Are you kidding me? Her outrageous comment left my father-in-law and Calvin with their bongs hanging open. They were so shocked that their minds went totally blank. Calvin, who had come to his senses, hastily spoke up to her. "Mom, what the heck is wrong with you?" "Oh, no, sweetheart. I didn't mean anything bad. It's just that I had expected you to choose a prettier and classier girl. Why are you being so rude? Sandra is the most wonderful woman to me. But, if it was up to me, I'd pick someone more suitable for you." That's enough. I don't want to hear about it anymore. If you keep insulting her, I'll never speak to you again. His statement made her instantly turn pale. She seemed to never have thought that he was going to defend me that much. She frantically apologized to him. "I'm sorry, Calvin. I don't mean to hurt you. I just wanted to be happy. My happiness is my decision. You don't get to decide what makes me happy. It's my bad. Don't be so mad at me. I didn't mean to upset you." "Then promise me you'll never say anything bad about Sandra ever again." "Of course, I promise I won't." She clearly agreed in front of all of us on that day. That was why I decided to let it go and move on. I hoped that we would be able to build a good relationship in the future. Unfortunately, that was not the case. Her promise was only to smooth things out with Calvin at that time. One day, about 2 months after our marriage, I suddenly received a call from her. Calvin and I didn't have a wedding, so I hadn't seen or spoken to her since that day. I hoped she wouldn't say anything strange again and anxiously answered the phone. "Yes, hello?" Immediately she let out a loud sigh and accused me of something. "Sandra, I hear you've been carried away." "Excuse me?" "Calvin told me you're forcing him to do the housework for whatever reason." "I don't mean to impose on him." "Maybe not." "He also defended you and said you both work so you share the housework." "But you know what? Housework is supposed to be a woman's responsibility." I stifled the urge to ask her which year she was stuck in and just went along with her. Taking advantage of the fact that I didn't talk back, she threw harsh words at me one after another. "He's a sweet guy, so he accepts whatever is thrown at him without saying a word. If you take advantage of him, he will surely grow tired of you someday. I'm not quite sure what you're talking about. I think only he understands how he feels." "How dare you? I'm his mother. Of course I know him better than anyone else. But he's never said anything like that to me." "Shut up! Don't you ever talk over me. That's why people with lousy upbringing are." The memory of the day I met her came back to me, and my blood rushed to my head with great force. I barely restrained myself and continued talking calmly. "Well, with all due respect, You promised that you would never say anything bad to me again, didn't you? I didn't say anything bad. I'm just saying what I think. I'm hurt enough. If you just want to make an insulting call, could you please refrain from doing so? Oh, dear. That's why I didn't want him to marry a disobedient girl. She was satisfied with what she had said and hung up the phone before I could say anything back. The sound of the disconnected tone echoing in my ears increased my irritation. What the heck just happened? Did she take her time just to insult me? I couldn't get over it. I was adamant to report it to Calvi when he got home. When he did that evening, I immediately brought up the matter. He looked surprised and apologetic. Seriously, I'm sorry after all the warning I gave her. Not your fault. I can't talk back to her, too. You have the right to. I'll call her now. Thanks. He took out his phone and called her right away. He was talking harshly the whole time and I could hear Judith sobbing on the other end. After about 10 minutes of talking, he ended the call looking puzzled. I'm confused. My mom kept insisting that she didn't mean any harm. She didn't, huh? Just like the last time? I mentioned to her a while ago that I was doing the housework. Apparently, that prickled her nerves. That's what she said to me, too. But, don't worry. I cleared up the misunderstanding once again. I told her that it is our intention to share the chores. And that you were not forcing me to do it. She said she understood. I hope so. What concerned me was her excuse that she had no bad intentions. It bothered me a lot. After that, she stopped calling me. And we only occasionally visited my in-laws. Although she didn't bluntly pick on me, she tried to intimidate me by giving me a cold shoulder, bumping into me on purpose, and so on. Even after a year of marriage, her attitude was still as cold as ever. But I had gotten used to it and stopped caring about her so much. Then one day, to my surprise, my in-laws invited us on a trip. Apparently, my father-in-law Dan had always wanted to go on a family vacation. But because of the relationship between Judith and me, he wasn't able to suggest it before. Since I had been paying much less attention to her, he interpreted it as a sign that we had been on the mend. He suggested the four of us go on a trip to a lakeside. Of course, Calvin readily agreed, but asked what I wanted to do. I had no reason to decline the invitation. I didn't know what Judith thought about it, but I thought it might have been a good opportunity for us to get to know each other better. With such positive thinking, I gladly accepted the invitation. 1 month later, on the day of the trip, we had to take a mountain road to the destination. At the foot of the mountain, there were many sightseeing spots which I was looking forward to visiting. Calvin and Dan, on the other hand, decided to go hiking in the mountains. Since Judith and I weren't so fit, we inevitably decided to go separately. Calvin asked me if I would be okay, but I didn't suspect she would do anything to me during the trip. I assured him that I would be okay and we parted with a smile. As I thought, Judith never harassed me after we became alone. Sandra, look at this grass work. Isn't it so beautiful? These pastries look delicious. Let's buy some for later. I read that this variety store is famous. Since you work in the same field, you must be interested. As if our previous relationship had been a lie, she was very proactive in interacting with me. I was so pleased with her that I had a smile the whole time. To be honest, I wasn't keen on being alone with her, but it turned out to be great and I was moved. I let my guard down without knowing what awaited me later. It was almost dusk when we finished sightseeing. We were going to make the last shuttle that Judith had checked in advance. When we arrived at the shuttle stop, Judith looked at her watch and muttered we still had 10 minutes. It would take almost an hour to get to the cabin going up the mountain road. I was thankful for the shuttle service. Calvi and Dan were going directly by car. While Judith and I waited for the shuttle to arrive, she apologetically asked, "Sorry to ask, Sandra, but can you go buy me a drink? I'm a little thirsty." "Sure, what would you like?" "I'd like a tea, not too sweet. I'd also like some snacks." "Okay, I'll be back." I took my wallet and my phone and headed for the convenience store a short distance away. 10 minutes would have been enough time. I picked out some snacks that I thought she would have liked and paid the bill. But then when I returned to the bus stop, she was gone. Wait, what? I hurriedly checked the timetable and found that the last shuttle had left 5 minutes ago. As I was in despair, I received a call from her. Judith, the shuttle! Her high-pitched laughter cut me off. I was bewildered, not knowing what was going on, as she triumphantly said, "Too bad for you. You're so inconsiderate to come along on our family trip in the first place." Inconsiderate? Why did you lie by the time? Because you've been acting up and annoying me. You're just a stranger to me. Is that what you think of me? A stranger like you should walk 4 hours to the cabin. Understood? I don't know why I couldn't fight back. I was just so shocked by the fact that she hated me so much. At that moment, I felt sadness and an inexpressible anger well up inside me. How dare she? What did I do to deserve this? Fine. I'll make it to the cabin by foot. I started to walk along the mountain path with determination. As I mentioned earlier, I wasn't so fit. I'm not good at running, let alone hiking. It was extremely difficult to walk uphill for 4 hours. About an hour into the walk, my knees started to buckle. Just when I was about to give up, I received a call from Calvin. Hey, Han! Dad and I finished hiking early. If you haven't arrived at the cabin yet, we'll pick you up. Or are you already there? I tried calling Mom, but she didn't pick up. I left her a message. Help me! Honey? Help me! Please come and get me! I found myself in tears and screaming. The sun had already set and there was only the mountain road ahead of me. My mental state had already reached its limit. I told him that Judith had left me at the shadow stop and that I was on my way on foot alone. He said he was coming right away. And hung up. My phone rang again right after and it was from Judith. I dared not answer it, but it rang incessantly. She must have read the message from Calvin that he was picking me up and called me in a hurry. She must have freaked out. I kept ignoring her calls and waited for Calvin to pick me up. Half an hour later, I was inside a car with him and Dan. I was so relieved and tears started rolling down again. Dan was already informed of what had happened and apologized to me with a battered look. I'm so sorry, Sandra. Judith has gone way over the line. It's okay now. Thank you so much for picking me up. You must have been scared alone in the dark. Here, take this. He handed me a cup of hot tea. Thank you. It filled me with warmth. The sadness I had felt earlier was gone and only anger towards Judith remained. When we arrived at the cabin, she came running up to me, clutching her phone. Oh, Sandra, thank God you're okay. You're safe. What? I didn't think you'd miss the bus. I went ahead, but I was going to ask Calvin to pick you up. Apparently, she wanted to treat the incident as an accident, not intentional. I missed the bus by chance. That was what she was going for. Unfortunately for her, I had already told the others everything. She told me a false time and made me go to the store at the right moment. That alone was enough to convey malice. Calvin and Dan headed straight for the main building without getting their luggage out. Where are you guys going? When Judith asked, Dan replied coldly, We are leaving. I'll pay for this place, so don't you ever return to my house. Wait, stop him, Calvin. Calvin glared at her, who trembled with fear. We know you did it on purpose. I trusted you, but it was all a lie, wasn't it? Sweetheart, that's not true. It's all a misunderstanding. What did I misunderstand? You lied about the time and left Sandra behind. That's what you did, right? Always pretending it wasn't your fault. It was always you. I'm deeply disappointed. Oh, Calvin, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm not the one you should be apologizing to. I have no intention of forgiving you anyway. The father and son turned their backs to her and walked away. Then she grabbed my arm with a pleading look. She was probably trying to get me to forgive her and get on the good side with them. I shook off her hand and said firmly, "Please don't touch me. I don't have the slightest intention of forgiving you." "But why?" "I'm genuinely trying to apologize." "Do you really think your apology is credible now?" "I will never forget what you have done to me. And I will never forgive you. I will never think of you as mother-in-law. Please never try to get in touch with me. Goodbye now." "Wait a minute, Sandra. Hey!" I went to join the others, leaving her sobbing. Afterward, I heard she tried to follow us home, but it was already dark and she gave up the idea. When she returned first thing in the morning, Dan had already packed her belongings and declared divorce to her. She contacted Calvin to apologize, but of course he refused. He has no intention of seeing her again. She has been cut off from her family who have been together for many years. I wonder how she will live on her own from now on. She will probably have to face the harsh reality, but it doesn't matter to me anymore. That day, she had already ceased to exist in my mind. I can only thank Calvin and Dan for believing my words and helping me. From now on, I am going to build an even better relationship with my real trustworthy family. My son has passed away too, so you're gonna head back to your parents, right? We'll take over this house. My dear husband, Tom, passed away unexpectedly. Right after the funeral, as I was drowning in sorrow, Tom's parents, my in-laws, came to visit. Though there weren't many, this house is filled with memories I shared with Tom. Why on earth do I have to leave?" Without giving me a moment to dry my eyes, my mother-in-law coldly made the statement. "My name is Katie. I work as a secretary at a real estate agency. My encounter with Tom was through the real estate agency where I worked. He was the elder brother of my male coworker, Joe. The two brothers were very close, and since their workplaces were nearby, Tom often dropped by. Since Joe and I worked together in the same position, we became friends. Through him, I was introduced to Tom. Gradually, I started joining the brothers for lunch, and our time together increased. I always thought of Tom as a nice, cheerful guy, but never really saw him as more than a friend. I assumed he felt the same until one day, something happened that changed our relationship. We had made plans to meet at a restaurant Joe had booked, but he had an emergency and couldn't make it. However, we thought it would be a waste to cancel the reservation. So, that was the first time Tom and I were alone together. I later found out that the brothers had planned this, with Joe wanting to set us up. The restaurant had great food, and we got lost in conversation, discussing our backgrounds, values, and more. We quickly became close. The more I got to know Tom, the more I was drawn to his warm smile. From that day, our relationship took a new turn. It didn't take long for us to decide to get married. If it wasn't for Joe's effort, this might not have happened. In that sense, I can't thank him enough. And then, the day came when I met Tom's parents. I was nervous, but they welcomed me warmly. Their thoughtful conversation put me at ease. "We're so happy you could come. We've been looking forward to meeting you, Katie. I've prepared lots of dishes hoping today would be special," said my mother-in-law as she looked after me. Tom's parents, like him, were very independent and easy to get along with. I was grateful for the wonderful time I had at my in-laws. Throughout our interactions, they always supported our happiness without pressuring us about marriage or kids. There was talk of living together at Tom's parents' place, but Tom and I had plans to build our dream house. "Actually, my grandpa left me a house," I explained. Tom's parents listened intently and nodded. Being the only granddaughter, my grandpa adored me. He had even renovated the house for me before leaving it as an inheritance. He passed away right after settling the inheritance. The property was in a prime location, which had recently been redeveloped, causing property values to soar. But given my experience in real estate, I knew that it might be more beneficial to sell it to fund our dream home project. Although I'm grateful for my grandpa's love, he did tell me that I could either live in or sell the house, so we were considering selling. After getting married, Tom and I moved there. However, it was far from our workplace, and regardless of the great location, it was hard to continue living there. As we proceeded with the selling plans, a significant change came into our lives. Tom, who worked in sales, was transferred. He worked for a major company with branches all over the country. Even though we were newlyweds, they said he was the only suitable candidate, and since it was an official order, he couldn't refuse. I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays. Plus, my parents are coming over to visit. It's okay if you don't want to, but could you perhaps show them around? Your dad and mom are lovely people, so going out with them won't be an issue. But letting go of our home might take some time. Due to my work, it's decided that Tom would be relocating alone for work. It was all so sudden, but all I could do was suppress my loneliness and worry, waiting for the day we could live together again. True to what Tom had said, during the holidays, especially my mother-in-law would frequently visit. She told me that back in the day when her husband, my father-in-law, used to travel frequently, she had to bear the loneliness multiple times while taking care of young kids. You can create family memories even without kids. Why don't we go out? Maybe shopping will brighten up your mood. Let's go, Katie! Thanks to my mother-in-law, I never felt alone, and in fact, my holidays became busier. But over time, I started to notice some concerns. On my days off from work, my mother-in-law would almost always invite me out. I appreciated it, but by the end of the month, her invitations became rather forceful, paying no mind to my fatigue or household chores. When I'd say, I'd like to rest this week, she'd frown as if I'd said something unreasonable. But isn't it fun to go out together? Or are you saying you don't like hanging out with me? No, it's not that. But you've been taking me out every week. Don't you need a break too? She looked sad. No matter how much I tried to clear up the misunderstanding, she wouldn't listen. But as soon as I gave in, she'd flash a bright smile, acting as if she'd forgotten how persistently she clung to me. My doubts about her behavior grew over time. The places she dragged me to often involved high expenditures, constant shopping at brand stores, and expensive meals, and she'd set it up so I'd have to cover the bill. She would often leave the store early, and I'd be left with no choice but to pay. She'd neither thank me for the payments nor reimburse me later. Sure, we own our home and my salary is decent, so savings aren't a concern. But Tom and I have always been frugal, so her extravagant behavior felt out of place. Sometimes both in-laws were present, and in those cases, it was even worse. My father-in-law, Joe, would join in, and my financial burden would only increase. I knew I had to address this, but couldn't confide in Tom. He had promised, I'll definitely be coming home during the holidays, but his new work location was extremely busy, and he couldn't come home often. I heard from Mom that you guys go out every week. Is everything okay? You don't seem worried. When I video called Tom, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes and his slightly thinner cheeks. The fatigue from work was evident. I felt guilty bringing up the issue with his mother, so I tried to reassure him. Your mom's been treating me really well. But you need to take care of yourself, okay? I'm fine, so don't worry. I kept reassuring Tom while I continued to bear the cost of outings with the in-laws. However, their behavior escalated, and when I asserted that I couldn't go out one day, they dropped this on me. Hey, could you perhaps lend me some money? Ha! You want me to pay? Just a little bit, really? I've already booked a restaurant. I'll just take another friend, so could you cover the cost I don't have on hand? I didn't want to, but refusing would complicate things. I resignedly opened my wallet. But she never behaved this way in front of Tom. I subtly asked her, have you talked to Tom about this, and was surprised when she responded, it'd be embarrassing to ask Tom. It seemed she felt it was more appropriate to ask Tom's wife, me, for money. I had long given up on my mother-in-law and it became a daily occurrence for her to ask for money. At least when I gave her money, which she called an allowance, she would stop forcing me out of the house. I knew the situation had gotten out of hand. But I was exhausted from not being able to communicate with my mother-in-law. Her actions became increasingly bizarre and inexplicable. Without prior notice, she would just show up, and it felt like an invasion of privacy when she would look around the house, inside and out. Is this something your grandfather left behind? These furnishings. They're fantastic to have such luxurious items. Some of the furniture were antiques that my grandfather cherished. My mother-in-law seemed to adore them, coming over uninvited and gazing at them dreamily, as if they were her own. This is mine and Tom's home. I started to consider confronting her about her behavior. Tom might be surprised, but how wonderful it would be if we could figure out how to deal with her together. Her actions were certainly not pleasant. Even if she's family by marriage, it's an invasion of privacy. However, around the same time, Tom's period of work assignment was decided. He'll be back in a short while, and once he's around, my in-laws will probably stop asking for money. A glimmer of hope sprouted in my heart. Tom works hard every day, so I just need to be patient a little longer. I was eagerly awaiting my reunion with him, but then the unexpected happened. What? Tom collapsed. He's in the hospital? I felt numb. The call came from one of his coworkers at the assignment, and I rushed to the hospital. Perhaps due to his busy schedule, he suddenly had a heart attack. Tom was taken in an ambulance, but it was too late. My loving husband, who was always the picture of health, passed away suddenly from an unforeseen attack. I had to arrange his funeral in a daze. The overwhelming grief meant I didn't remember much. Joe, my brother-in-law, was there, taking care of most things. I'm sorry. Even though you've just lost your brother, you're helping out so much. It's my brother's funeral, of course I'd help. More importantly, are you okay with the property? Is the house all set? Towards the end of the funeral, while we were tidying up, I chatted with Joe. I nodded and responded, everything's in order. A few days after Tom's funeral, both of my in-laws visited. However, it was clear they weren't there to console me. It's a pity about our son, but we're here for you, so don't you worry. For some reason, my mother-in-law had a smug grin on her face. To my astonishment, she had arranged for a moving truck, packed full with furniture and items from their home. I was so shocked and confused that I couldn't speak. This certainly looked like a move. Looks like my mother-in-law and her family are trying to move in without discussing it with me. What made them do this? But the answer is obvious. Could it be they're after our property? Even in my confusion, I voiced the concern that had been nagging me. My mother-in-law flashed a cold, smug smile. The property value's gone up quite a bit. I've always had my eyes on this house. Or should I say, the only reason you could marry my son was because of this inheritance? I allowed the marriage because you inherited it. I felt a surge of despair and was at a loss for words. So, you're saying you and your family are going to live here with me? What? What are you talking about? I asked in confusion, and she raised an eyebrow. Although Tom's death was unexpected, truth be told, my mother-in-law had always planned to get this house. It seems they intend to oust me and take over the property. And they assumed I'd willingly leave the place. Now that my son's gone, you're gonna go back to your parents' home, right? This house will be empty, and that's just sad. So, we're moving in. No need to worry. Her grin distorted wickedly. Overcome with a mix of fear and frustration, I corrected her. The house is already sold, though. I tried to suppress a smirk at her misunderstanding, but a hint of amusement showed. In response, my mother-in-law was stunned. Just then, another moving truck, from a different company, pulled up. Excuse me, we're here to move stuff into this house. Perhaps seeing another company's truck made the burly worker approach us for confirmation. The movers my mother-in-law had arranged also stepped out. Realizing that they couldn't start their job with another truck present, they looked perplexed. They sought an explanation from the mother-in-law and father-in-law, but the couple was flustered and clueless. Arguing with everyone wouldn't help. Seeing the chaotic state of my in-laws, I finally regained my composure. I gave clear instructions to move the truck. This house is already sold and the contract is finalized. A new family will be moving in, so we can't have your belongings here, right? As the movers were taken aback, a luxury car arrived. Out came a wealthy-looking couple and their children. Turns out, I no longer owned the property. They were the new owners. My in-laws were utterly baffled, unable to comprehend the situation. Please move the truck quickly. The new occupants can't start their work. Once the in-laws' truck was moved, the movers began their work promptly, bringing in brand new furniture. My mother-in-law, unable to accept the reality, persisted in her demands at the doorstep. The new owner tried to shield his family and approached us, leading to another round of chaos. Who exactly are you? We bought this place. Please have the truck leave. I hadn't expected my in-laws to show up, so I apologized profusely and managed to calm them down. But my mother-in-law wasn't done. Incredibly, she and her husband barged into the house. Naturally, the interior was nothing like they remembered. Not a single piece of furniture that my husband and I had was left. Witnessing this, my mother-in-law was horrified and began to create a scene. What the heck? The house is completely empty. All the antique furniture and lights. They were my favorites. Hey, what's going on here? Katie was outraged, unable to grasp what was happening. When the new occupants threatened, "I'm gonna call the police," her jittery father-in-law quickly fled, pulling his wife along with him. Once they distanced themselves a bit from the scene, the heated mother-in-law cooled down a bit and quieted. For now, I apologized to the new occupants first. Given a warning that there might be more issues in the future, I was allowed to go after noting down the names and addresses of my in-laws. I was drained but still had to explain things to my in-laws. Returning to them, I calmly informed that we had already moved out a few days before Tom's passing. This house was originally planned to be sold with the land, just as initially planned. We had to hold off once due to Tom's work assignment, but the smooth progress had a certain backdrop. The person who supported our decision was Joe. I was perplexed by the change in my in-laws who started asking for money, but I didn't want to worry Tom, so I kept it to myself and had been sulking. Joe, who realized this, came to my rescue. He apparently had a rough relationship with our family-in-law and promised to help whenever I was in trouble. I didn't want to strain my relationship with my husband or my in-laws, so I trusted Joe, who promised to keep it a secret, and decided to consult him about everything. Upon hearing my story, he was furious at his parents. Being Tom's younger brother and also a colleague at my workplace, he understood their scheming very well. And for Joe, his brother Tom was the only family he had. He considered me, Tom's wife, as family as well. Heck, I think our parents either planned to live in that house or cleverly kick the two of us out and claim it for themselves, he said. According to Joe, both of our in-laws have a lavish lifestyle and are pretentious, resorting to any means necessary. Especially the mother-in-law, who acts like a lovely lady on the surface but in reality, only thinks about her own convenience, being quite wicked. The stories Joe, their own son, tells about them are quite shocking. Tom probably never got to see this side of them since he's the eldest and they'd act differently in front of him. Anyway, Joe suggested selling the land as soon as possible to ensure it's not taken away by our in-laws. I agreed with Joe's opinion and decided to proceed with the sale. No matter how precious the property inherited from my grandfather, I didn't want it to become a hindrance to our marriage. Rather, precisely because it's precious, I didn't want any bad blood tied to it. Of course, it wasn't a decision made arbitrarily. Tom and I discussed it and I got his consent. At that time, he got to know about all the actions of his parents. I really didn't want to inform him, but I couldn't handle the sale alone. However, Tom understood my feelings and strongly disapproved of his parents' actions. I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier. If it's okay with you, let's finalize the sale before my parents make a move. It's a precious house inherited from your grandfather and I feel guilty. No, don't worry. If it's gonna cause trouble, I think my grandfather would agree that we should let it go. I decided to sell the land not because of the relationship with my in-laws, but to protect the future with Tom. Regarding the sale, Joe, who is a real estate expert, did his best to find the best buyer. What I needed to do was find a new place to move as soon as possible and act naturally so that the in-laws wouldn't suspect anything. Though the house had been lived in, it was almost brand new, which kept the price reasonable. With that, we quickly found a buyer and everything fell into place. They were the family that had just arrived. Originally, we were supposed to wait for Tom's return in our new house. It's just a shame because Tom was also pleased with the sale. Workers swiftly brought in the furniture. Despite the in-laws being ousted, the moving process steadily moved forward. The in-laws just stood there in shock, but they couldn't stay like that forever. The moving company they had hired approached them, clearly infuriated, demanding an explanation. From the movers' perspective, there was an inexplicable oversight, causing a clash in the moving bookings. I can't believe this is happening. This is a breach of contract. They confronted the in-laws, but they were at a loss for words and couldn't explain properly. In the end, they had to take back all the household items, and it seemed like they were going to be charged a significant additional fee due to this unforeseen situation. My mother-in-law, perhaps finally grasping the situation, clung to me, trembling. This is the home of my eldest son's wife, our home too, right? This isn't normal, is it? She desperately tried to make excuses to persuade me, but I ignored her, took only my belongings, and left. The property now belonged to a new family, it wasn't even mine anymore, so there was nothing for me to respond to. The memorial service for my husband went smoothly. Although I did encounter my in-laws, they seemed like they wanted to say something about the house, but they just whispered amongst themselves and left. I didn't feel any obligation to communicate with them anymore, so we barely spoke. I lived my days in peace. In a new home. In the small house where we were supposed to start anew, I faced the grief of losing my husband, Tom. I had a significant amount of savings from the sale, but with Tom gone, my plans to build our dream home vanished. I returned to work and, immersed in the precious memories with Tom, began to focus on healing and moving forward. On the other hand, it seemed that my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, had been harboring deep resentment. I didn't want to deal with them anymore, so I didn't inform them of my new address. Being unable to interact with me further intensified the dissatisfaction inside my mother-in-law. She was too proud to go to my brother-in-law, Joe, with whom relations had soured, and she didn't know where I lived either. The stress piled on, and eventually, she lost her balance. One fateful night, she attempted a heinous act by spreading gasoline around the Soul house. Fortunately, a nearby resident found her suspicious and detained her. The police were alerted, and it was found she had also prepared paper and a lighter. She was arrested on suspicion of attempted arson. The man who almost had his house set on fire was extremely furious when he recognized her as the woman who had stormed in on the moving day. He was adamant about pressing charges, and I was informed. I apologized, but that was for the horrifying experience of almost being a victim of arson. There was nothing I could do about my mother-in-law's actions. In the end, she couldn't avoid being charged. And due to my repeated apologies, I managed to get forgiveness on the condition that such an incident would never happen again. Having grown up spoiled and never experiencing hardship, my mother-in-law had always gotten what she wanted. That's probably why, when she couldn't have that house, her frustration led to a twisted envy. She began to resent both the house and the land, which drove her to crime and eventually landed her in prison. Her husband, who should have been her pillar of support, fought constantly after her arrest and ultimately decided to divorce her. Thus, when she was released from prison, she had no home to return to. But, one could say it was the result of her choices. Joe, having lost his brother, felt lonely but always said, "Having you as my sister-in-law makes it bearable," comforting me. Even though I had cut ties with my in-laws, I hadn't lost all my family. For Tom, who I believe is watching over me from heaven, I decided to live each day. As the moving truck pulled away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake, the last thing I expected to see was my mother-in-law, Marjorie, stepping out with a suitcase and a smug smile. "Hope you don't mind, dear, but I decided to move in." I stood frozen in disbelief as Marjorie strode up the front walkway of our new home, as if she owned the place. Just moments ago, Theo and I were kissing passionately, thrilled to finally move into our dream home after years of scrimping and saving. Now his mother was on our doorstep, suitcase in hand, ready to crash the party. "Surprise!" Marjorie sang, breezing past me into the foyer. "Theo, be a dear and get my bags." I followed her inside, watching in shocked silence as Theo happily carried in her luggage. "Isn't this great, babe?" He grinned. "Mom's going to live with us? Now you'll have help around the house." My hands clenched into fists. I had explicitly told Theo I did not want his mother moving in with us. We had gone over this. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Can I talk to you for a minute, Theo? I said tightly, pulling him into the kitchen. Marjorie was already making herself at home, inspecting the rooms. This is our first day in our new home, I hissed. You can't just invite someone to live with us without asking me. Theo waved a hand. Oh, come on, it's just my mom. She's excited about the new place, too. Don't worry about it. I stared at him in disbelief. Worry about it? This is unacceptable, Theo. We've talked about this. I don't want anyone else living here. Theo's smile faded, his eyes flashing. Well, I already told Mom she could stay. And as the man of the house, it's my decision. He turned and strode out of the room, leaving me speechless. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger and anxiety churning inside me. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. Theo and I were supposed to celebrate our beautiful new home together. Instead, his mother had swooped in uninvited, acting like she owned the place. And Theo, as usual, refused to take my concerns seriously. I found Marjorie in the guest bedroom, critically eyeing the freshly painted walls. Well, I suppose this will have to do, she sniffed. Though the lighting isn't ideal. Theo said I could have this room, yes? My fingernails dug into my palms. I forced a tight smile. Marjorie, this isn't a good time. Theo and I weren't prepared. Marjorie cut me off with an icy stare. Why? Because I didn't ask your permission. She let out a grating laugh. You forget, my son owns this house, too. I have as much right to be here as you do. Hot anger flared through me. How dare she? I opened my mouth to respond, but she breezed past me, calling for Theo. I stood alone in the guest room, shocked and enraged, making my hands tremble. This was supposed to be my haven, my refuge. Instead, Theo's mother had invaded and stuck her flag in the soil. A war was coming, and I refused to surrender. The next morning, I shuffled bleary-eyed to the kitchen to make my usual pot of dark roast. To my surprise and irritation, Marjorie had beaten me there. Well, good morning, sunshine, she crowed, wafting the bitter smell of her weak tea my way. I made breakfast for my two favorite people. Dig in! I stared at the sad spread on the counter, limp bacon, rubbery eggs, and some species of grain mush. Theo ambled in, hair sticking up every which way. Thanks, Ma, he said through a mouthful of food. This is awesome. I poured myself a strong coffee. I have an early meeting. I need to get ready. As I dressed for work, I fumed over Marjorie's nerve. This was my kitchen, not hers. And that breakfast. A toddler could have done better. At least at the office, I could have some peace. After an endless day of meetings, I arrived home bone-tired, wanting nothing more than a hot bath. But when I walked into the bedroom, I stopped short. Marjorie had completely rearranged the furniture and hung heavy drapes that blocked out the warm afternoon light. This was my sanctuary, my space. How dare she? I marched out to the patio, where I could hear Theo and his mother chatting. Marjorie, you can't just rearrange our bedroom without asking. I said sharply. Theo glanced up from his beer. Oh, yeah, Mom helped me move some things around so she could set up her sewing area. I froze. For what? For my quilting, dear. Marjorie gave me a patronizing smile. Don't worry. I left room for the bed. You set up your sewing equipment in our bedroom? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you understand how inappropriate that is? Oh, honestly, Alara, Marjorie sniffed. It's just a room. No need to be so territorial. Right, Theo? She's got a point, babe. Theo took a nonchalant swig of beer, ignoring my reddening face. I was literally speechless with rage. This was absolutely the last straw. I retreated to the kitchen before I could say something I'd regret. We needed to have a serious talk about finances tonight, whether Theo wanted to or not. His spendthrift habits and the falling stock market had me worried about money for the first time. Over dinner, I broached the subject as diplomatically as I could. Theo, I think we should go over our budget tonight. Between the house and Marjorie, expenses seem high. Theo waved his fork dismissively. Our finances are fine, babe. I make good commissions. Even so, we made a plan. For heaven's sake, Alara, stop nagging the boy. Marjorie interrupted. We're having a nice dinner. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I need to know where we stand, Theo. We're not kids anymore. We can't just spend recklessly. Let's sit down tonight and enough. Theo snapped, banging his fist on the table. I jumped. Marjorie looked smug. Anger burned in Theo's eyes as he glowered at me. I'm in control of the finances here. All you need to worry about is keeping house and looking pretty. His lip curled in a sneer. Understood. My heart pounded as we stared at each other. Without a word, I stood, grabbed my keys, and walked out, his mocking laughter echoing behind me. I drove around for hours trying to calm down before finally heading home. The lights were off when I crept in, except for the flickering blue glow of the television. I hoped Theo had gone to bed, but when I passed by the living room, I saw his silhouette still reclined in his armchair. There you are, he said gruffly. Come watch this show with me. I hesitated, still upset from our argument. It's late. I should get some sleep. Theo clicked off the TV and swiveled to face me, his eyes drilling into mine. We need to talk. I braced myself for another fight as I perched on the couch. Theo templed his fingers, staring at me ominously. I've been thinking, he said. You've been very selfish lately. My mouth fell open. Selfish? How could you say? He held up a hand. Hear me out. We have this beautiful new home now, yet all you do is complain. My mother is here out of the kindness of her heart, but instead of being grateful, you whine about finances that are under control. He leaned forward. It's disruptive and disrespectful. I blinked rapidly, outraged he was twisting this around on me. Theo, I've supported you in everything, including buying this house to stretch ourselves thin. But I'm worried now. We never see eye to eye on money, in between Marjorie interfering in everything. Theo's fist crashed down on the side table, making me jump. That's exactly what I mean. My mother has done nothing but help since she arrived, and I've told you I'm handling finances. He rose from the chair, looming over me. I'm losing patience here, Alara. This arrangement clearly isn't working for you. His eyes bored into mine. So let's make something very clear. I am head of this household. You will show me respect, and you will accept my decisions, including my mother living here. Understood? I stared up at him, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream at him, but the cold look in his eyes frightened me. Jaw clenched, I managed a terse nod. Seemingly satisfied, Theo stalked off to bed. I remained frozen on the couch, adrenaline coursing through me. Only when I heard his rumbling snores echo from down hall did I allow angry tears spill down my cheeks. How had my marriage deteriorated into this? Theo had never spoken to me that way before, so aggressive and intimidating. I thought of Marjorie's smug face at dinner and my hands curled into fists. This was all her influence. She was poisoning Theo against me. I was sure of it. That horrible woman had infiltrated my home, destroyed my sanctuary, turned my life upside down. In that moment, the last shreds of love I had for my husband seemed to shrivel up inside me. As I crept off to bed alone, steeling myself against his blistering snores, the beginnings of a plan took root in my mind. If Theo refused to choose me over his toxic mother, then I would choose myself. It was time to take back control of my life, no matter what it took. Marjorie Jennings may have won this battle by cunning and manipulation, but I would win the war. Over the next few days, I walked on eggshells around Theo, keeping my head down. Let him think I was cowed. Behind the scenes, I began preparations for my escape. I called my lawyer and filed a quick claim for the new house, securing my partial ownership. It had been a battle to get Theo to even put my name on the deed. Little did he know that decision would come back to bite him. Next, I secretly contacted a forensic accountant, giving her access to all our financial records. 2 days later, she confirmed my worst fears. Theo had drained most of our savings into risky investments. We owed nearly double our income in credit card debt. And if his commissions stopped flowing like they had been, we'd be bankrupt within 6 months. My hands shook with anger and vindication as I emailed the evidence to myself. No wonder Theo refused to discuss money. He knew this house of cards could implode any day. I had been pleading with him for years to budget better. Now we were on the brink of financial ruin, all because of his arrogance. That night, over another miserable dinner, I decided to make one last appeal. Theo, I saw the statements, I said quietly. We're in serious trouble. We need to come up with a plan. Theo's face darkened. Have you been snooping behind my back? I'm trying to help, I cried. We could lose everything. How dare you go over my head? He rose slowly. Marjorie watched avidly. After everything I provide, this is the thanks I get? I shrank back, but stood my ground. We can fix this, Theo, together. If you'll just listen. Theo flung his plate aside with a crash. Get out! I froze. What? His fists clenched, eyes wild. You heard me. Get out of my house. I backed away, heart hammering. This wasn't the man I loved. Without looking back, I fled upstairs, threw essentials into a suitcase, and locked myself in the bathroom, listening to Theo raging below as Marjorie attempted to soothe him. After an hour had passed, I crept downstairs to the darkened house. Slipping out the front door, I started my car and drove off into the night, resolved more than ever to take Theo down. I had tried being reasonable, I had pleaded, begged for compromise, but the time for talking was done. Over the next 2 days at a hotel, paid in cash, I met again with my lawyer and set things in motion. Using Theo's credit card information, I hired an investigator to dig deeper. What she uncovered made me sick. He had a whole second life hidden away. Mistresses, illegitimate debts, shady business dealings he'd kept hidden even from Marjorie. My heart turned to ice. This man was a stranger to me now, but he had crossed the wrong woman. Theo had no idea what was coming for him when those divorce papers hit. And Marjorie! I hope she enjoyed the view from atop her high horse because I was about to take her down too, once and for all. The battle lines were drawn and I was playing for blood. After a week holed up in the hotel finalizing my plans, I knew I couldn't hide forever. It was time to return home and set the next phase in motion. I rehearsed what I would say countless times on the drive back. I had to get in, act normal, and get out again without raising suspicions. Quietly, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. Voices rang out from the kitchen. Before I could sneak past, Marjorie appeared, blocking my path. Well, look who finally decided to show up, she snapped. Behind her, I could see Theo at the table refusing to look at me. I stood taller, just picking up a few things. Then I'll be on my way. As I tried to brush past her, Marjorie grabbed my arm. I don't think so. Time for a little chat, girlie. Shaking her off, I retreated to the bedroom with Marjorie on my heels. As I shoved clothes into a bag, she cornered me, arms crossed. Let me make something abundantly clear, she hissed, jabbing her finger at me. You will stop this childish tantrum nonsense and return home where you belong. My son has supported you long enough while you repay him with deceit. Adrenaline flooded my veins. I stepped closer until we were nose to nose. You don't scare me, I said through gritted teeth. This is still my house, too. Now get out of my way. I tried to push past her, but Marjorie shoved me backwards as hard as she could. I crashed painfully against the wall, bruising my shoulder. Shock reverberated through me. She had assaulted me in my own home. At that moment, something inside me snapped. This vile woman had taken everything from me, my dignity, my home, my marriage. Enough was enough. I want you out, I said, my voice dangerous and low. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave this house. Marjorie's eyes widened in outrage. How dare you? Theo, she screeched. Did you hear how she spoke to me? Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. Before Theo could appear, I stepped forward until Marjorie had to crane her neck to look up at me. If you ever touch me again, I will have you arrested, I promised. You've overstayed your welcome. Get out now! Theo arrived at the doorway. When he heard Marjorie's wild accusations of my behavior, his face mottled red with fury. He seemed ready to explode. But before he could speak, I met his bulging eyes. We need to discuss some things, privately. My voice was steel. With a huff, Marjorie stormed off. I could hear drawers slamming violently from down the hall as she packed. Meanwhile, Theo eyed me with clenched fists. I had to tread carefully like defusing a bomb. In as calm a voice as I could muster, I issued an ultimatum. I am moving forward with a divorce. You will communicate through my lawyer from now on. Theo's mouth fell open. You spiteful be asterisk 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 asterisk, he snarled. You'll regret this. He turned and slammed his fist into the wall with a sickening crack. I didn't even flinch. Send your threats to my legal team, I replied coolly before breezing past him with head held high. The plan was in motion. My counterattack had begun. Soon I heard Marjorie's muffled weeping as Theo consoled her. But I felt nothing at all. That bridge had been burned to ash a long time ago. Now all that was left was to raise Theo's house down upon him and salt the earth besides. This was only the beginning. The divorce papers were delivered to Theo's office 2 days later. Within hours, the furious calls and emails started lighting up my phone. I ignored them all, letting them pile up. Finally, he resorted to showing up unannounced at my hotel. When I opened the door to his red, sweaty face, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction at catching him so off guard. You think you can blindside me like this? Theo raged. I won't sign anything until we talk, alone. There's nothing left to say. It's over. Theo forced his way in, knocking the doorstop aside. I retreated to keep distance between us, poised to call security. I know you set me up somehow, Theo hissed, prowling closer. There's no way you uncovered all that other stuff legally. I scoffed. Don't like seeing your dirty secrets on full display? Get out of my room! Dirty secrets? Theo bellowed, flecks of spit flying. You mean hard choices I made to support our lifestyle after you chose a dead-end career? His hypocrisy stoked my fury. I told you over and over we were headed towards disaster, but all you ever cared about was stroking your own ego. I stepped closer, glaring into his eyes. You reap what you sow. Consider this your wake-up call. With a guttural cry, Theo kicked over a chair. Do you realize what you've done? My mother, in hysterics. My bosses, furious. You've destroyed my life, you deceitful be asterisk 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 asterisk. His verbal assault escalated to new, venomous heights, but I stood rooted in place. His insults and accusations washed over me, helpless to penetrate the ice around my heart. Part of me pitied this broken man, crumbling before my eyes, his empire of lies collapsing all at once. But a bigger part felt victorious. When Theo finally paused his tirade, shoulders heaving, I spoke calmly. I did warn you, over and over, but you didn't listen. I held his gaze steadily. I had no choice but to take drastic steps. You'll come out of this better for it someday. Theo glared at me with raw hatred, twisting his features into a monstrous mask. In a low, quaking voice, he vowed bloody revenge, promised to fight me till the bitter end. But I saw the fear swirling in his eyes. Theo was out of allies, resources, and options. His downfall was sealed. With immense satisfaction, I watched Theo's hulking form retreat from the room, broken and diminished. The hotel door had barely shut behind him before I allowed a triumphant smile. Theo could kick and scream all he wanted now. He was a declawed beast without refuge, and I would show no mercy. In the following days, Theo's rare moments of lucidity were eclipsed by endless, vitriolic voicemails, but he remained all bluster and no substance now. When I spoke to my lawyer, she confirmed Theo had signed the divorce papers with surprisingly little resistance. He knew full well the skeletons I could expose and had wisely folded. Checkmate! After everything I endured silently for so long, Theo's downfall felt gratifying and just. I watched with vindication as the life he had built through lies and manipulation fell away in tatters. Let him finally learn what rock bottom feels like. And his enabling mother now forced to face consequences too. Just desserts indeed. The hard part was over now. My new life and hard-won freedom awaited. With the divorce finalized, I wasted no time enacting the next phase of my plan. While Theo spiraled into depression, I was energized, seizing back control of my future. First things first, I needed to cut remaining ties by selling our house immediately. The housing market was still hot and I knew exactly how to leverage that. I hired the best agent, ordered fancy staging, and listed the property at a premium. When Theo caught wind I was selling his precious house out from under him, the raging emails resumed. But it was too late. Without the means to retaliate further, he was neutered. To my immense satisfaction, a bidding war erupted the first week and I soon had an excellent offer in hand. I scheduled the close date as soon as possible, wanting to salt the earth here for good. On moving day, I stopped by one last time to ensure Theo was fully out. The sight inside turned my stomach. Garbage cluttered the floors, holes gaped in the drywall, mirrors and windows were smashed. My beautiful home utterly destroyed out of spite. There in the wreckage stood Marjorie, hunched and unkempt, boxing a few last items. At the sight of me, her red-rimmed eyes flashed with impotent rage. "How could you do this to my son?" she croaked. "He loved you." I felt only icy pity for this fated woman before me. "Your son made his own poor choices, now he finally faces consequences." Gesturing at the destruction surrounding us, I added, though clearly still some growing up to do. Marjorie sniffed with disdain. "We should have turned you out on the street years ago, you ungrateful leech. Theo always deserved better than the likes of you." Her delusion was almost impressive. I stepped forward and spoke slowly so she would absorb every word. "I earned every dollar that bought this house. Your son pillaged our finances without consulting me. I owe him nothing, but he'll owe me for a long, long time." Leaving Marjorie gaping in shock, I strode outside, where the buyers awaited, delightedly oblivious to the drama this house had weathered. As I handed over the keys, relief washed over me. What rotten memories lingered in these walls were Theo's burden now. I was free. Over the next year, I focused fully on advancing my career, rebuilding my credit, and nurturing new friendships. When news filtered back about Theo losing his lucrative job or Marjorie shuttering her home to move into a trailer, I felt only grim satisfaction at the domino effect catching up to them. Soon the settlement money trickled in. Combined with the house profits, I now had ample savings stashed away safely in my name only. Theo and Marjorie's financial security, by contrast, was shredded beyond repair through their own short-sighted hubris. I still look back those painful years with Theo as a valuable awakening. No longer do I suppress my own needs to pacify others. I refuse to dim my light so weaker souls feel less threatened. The timid girl who silently endured Theo's cruelty died the day I walked out for good. She was reborn strong, steady, and proud. While Theo spirals ever downward, haunted by his folly, I thrive. And whenever frustration or doubt creep in, I need only conjure Marjorie's stunned expression when I handed over the house keys. Hard-won justice at long last served sweet. The wounds have healed. I stand tall, renewed. The best revenge indeed. 2 years after walking out, I hardly recognized the timid, browbeaten woman I once was. I stand taller now, empowered, reveling in newfound independence. While my wounds have healed, Theo and Marjorie continue unraveling. With his reputation and finances in tatters, Theo could barely afford the court-ordered alimony. It was pitiful yet fitting how small he became in the wake of destruction left by his ego. No sympathy for me, though. He was captain of that sinking ship. Last I heard, Marjorie's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. Her golden child son reduced to deadbeat status. Karma, indeed. From her daughter, I learned Marjorie was forced to abandon her planned retirement village lifestyle due to Theo's financial crash. Instead, she lives isolated and tortured by bitterness. I won't lie. This news elicited grim satisfaction after years enduring Marjorie's relentless meddling and cruelty. Her entitled dreams torn asunder. Long overdue penance earned. As for me, I reveled in new liberations. I soon sold my small flat and purchased a light-filled house closer to the city. I converted the third bedroom to a sleek home office befitting my recent promotion. Weeknights over wine, friends now fill rooms once occupied by Theo and Marjorie's swelling discontent. Their ghosts long banished from my blossoming sanctuary. This new chapter filled rapidly with travel adventures, gallery openings, and cherished loved ones. My only lingering regret: wasted years pandering to egos best forgotten. Never again! With the last divorce check deposited, I gained full closure on that old life chapter. No loose ends. No lingering what-ifs. Only blue skies ahead. Pride swelled in my chest as I stood smiling before my new travel-inspired mural-clutching signed divorce papers. Self-reclaimed on my own terms and joyfully beholden to none. Solvency restored. Circle of supportive friends thriving. Career zenith reached and counting. Marjorie would choke if she saw me now. But thoughts of her no longer elicit even ripples of emotion. I heard through the grapevine she languishes in her daughter's crowded basement now, the once regal matriarch reduced to pathetic freeloader. And Theo, he careens ever faster towards rock-bottom fate carved by his own hands. My lawyer keeps me informed of his periodic legal requests for more divorce settlement funds. Requests promptly rejected. I owe that man nothing but life lessons learned. Tonight friends are coming over to toast my 38th birthday and new memoir draft completion. This home overflows with hard-won fruits of my labor alone now. No one permitted to harvest unearned. As I take one final gratified look in the hallway mirror, I muse over all who declared me the jealous failed opportunist riding Theo's coattails. How satisfying to now stand wholly self-made and empowered in my dream home, financially secure and surrounded by authentic loved ones. My only concern? Perfecting the birthday cake recipe. Oh, we don't need you anymore. Strangers should just express their condolences and leave. With no regard for the onlookers, my mother-in-law yelled, "Today is the funeral of my recently deceased father-in-law." This woman who typically tormented me took this opportunity to let loose on me more than ever. How can she treat anyone like this with no hesitation? I was the one taking care of my father-in-law. As I struggled to contain my annoyance with my father-in-law, my husband, who was nearby, opens his mouth. You're right. Strangers are just a nuisance. With that, he steps in front of his mother. My name is Michelle Shore, 30 years old. I married my husband 2 years ago and currently live with him and his parents. My husband's name is Mike, also 30. We initially lived in an apartment, just the two of us, after getting married. However, it seemed my husband was an only child and had been quite adored by his mother. The calls from his mother were frequent, sometimes several times a day, even after our marriage. Mike, when will you come live with me? I don't mind if it's just you. Please come back. I'm lonely. You know, the greatest form of giving back to your parents is to just be with them. She would constantly beg for us to live with her like this. My husband didn't take it seriously and certainly had no intention of moving in with her. But one day, his father came to see us. Mike, Michelle, could you consider living with us? At this unexpected proposal, Mike asked with a troubled face, "What's this all about, Dad? You and Mom, you're both healthy. There's no need for us to live together, is there? We are physically well, but it's still rough at times for me, mentally. I may have reached my limit living alone with your mother." What do you mean, Dad? Well, after hearing the full story from his father, It seemed that ever since Mike had moved out, his mother's behavior had been progressively getting worse. She would verbally abuse his father and withdraw money from the bank without even asking. When they checked the balance of the bank account they had been saving for their retirement after a few months, it appeared that she had spent as much as $10,000 without even asking. When confronted, his mother readily confessed but showed no remorse. What's worse, she had no intention of returning the money and started complaining that the house has become uncomfortable since Mike left. Having reached his limits, his father made her swear on a written agreement that if she committed any more misdeeds, he would divorce her. Since then, there had been no abusive words or unauthorized spending, but the relationship between the two had not improved and a Cold War continued in their home. That's why his father was asking us to live with them, even for a short while, to ease the tension in their house. That night, my husband and I decided to discuss living with them. He seemed to think that I would be against it and began by saying, "I understand Dad's feeling, but Michelle, you'd be troubled if we suddenly had to live with them, wouldn't you?" But it's true that your father is having a hard time, right? If there's something we can do, we should do it, shouldn't we? But wouldn't that be hard on you? I'll be fine. Besides, your father is the one who will suffer if we don't do something. We have to help him as soon as possible. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Michelle. I'll talk to Dad about moving in with them. And thus, we as a couple decided to move in with my in-laws. My husband and my father-in-law came to an agreement and our new life started immediately the next month. My husband Mike always noticed my changes and was someone I could rely on when things got tough. My father-in-law too had a good relationship with us ever since our first meeting during our engagement. However, the one thing that concerned me was my mother-in-law. As I mentioned earlier, she doted on her son Mike, readily. When we went to meet them for our engagement, she only talked to Mike and completely ignored me. Even after we got married and visited their house a few times, she only talked to Mike. When she did talk to me, it was the bare minimum and she made it very clear that she didn't enjoy our conversations. It wasn't that I had a bad relationship with her, I just personally found her difficult. However, since moving in, she was always happy because she got to live with Mike. So we didn't have any major issues, even though she never really talked to me. One day, after about a year of living together, an incident broke out and it turned our life upside down. I got a phone call while I was at my part-time job. It was from Mike, who should have been at work too. "Michelle, listen carefully," he said. "It seems that Dad has collapsed and been taken to the hospital by an ambulance." "What? Dad?" I replied. "I'm leaving work now and heading to the hospital." "What about you, Michelle?" "Of course, I'm coming too." "I'll talk to my manager right now." "Okay, let me know when you get to the hospital." I hurried to the hospital and met up with Mike. When we got to my father-in-law's room, he was lying in bed but turned to us and spoke. "Sorry for making you worry," he said with a smile, which gave us a bit of relief. But then I noticed something odd. I looked around and timidly asked him, "Dad, where's Mom?" "Oh, her. She's at home." "Home? Why?" "I collapsed at home. She didn't even bother to call an ambulance. I had to call them myself." "So, she didn't even ride with you in the ambulance?" "That's right, but don't worry about it." "Oh, Dad!" The shocking revelation left us speechless. Not only me, but Mike too was turning red with rage. Thankfully, my father-in-law recovered and was able to be discharged after a few days. However, he was diagnosed with advanced cancer and the collapse had left him with severe paralysis throughout his body, leaving him unable to live alone. The doctor informed us that he needed full-time care and we were at a loss for words. When Mike relayed this to his mother, she let out a heavy sigh. She acted as if she was being inconvenient. But Mike and I managed to persuade her and we all decided to work together to take care of my father-in-law. Mike made a good earning, so I quit my part-time job to dedicate myself to caregiving and house chores. Ever since then, my life centered around caregiving. While it was challenging to adjust to something new, my father-in-law always wore a smile and thanked me, saying, "Thank you." When Mike got home from work, he would take over the caregiving responsibilities. This allowed me to finish preparing dinner and take a bath while enjoying a brief period of freedom. We were living each day in this cycle, making it possible for me to continue providing care without overburdening myself. That being said, it wasn't all smooth sailing. When Mike left for work, my mother-in-law wouldn't lift a finger to help. Moreover, she would become irritated when I was busy caring for my father-in-law and couldn't handle all the housework. One day, unable to bear the situation any longer, I confronted her directly. Mother-in-law, could you maybe help out a bit more? I asked. What? Why all of a sudden? You're so full of yourself. She responded. If you don't want to take care of my father-in-law, I'll do it. Could you at least help out a little with the household chores in return? Shut up! You're only our daughter-in-law. The housework is your job. And of course, so is taking care of him. Wait a minute. We've talked about doing our best to help each other out. You decided that on your own, didn't you? Don't drag me into that. I just wish he would die already. I need the inheritance money. Hold on! How could you say such a thing? Your husband is still... Enough! You're a stranger to begin with. The conversation ended with my mother-in-law calling me disrespectful and leaving. I asked her for help a few more times, but to no avail. I also talked to Mike about it, and he tried to talk to her, but she would always play the victim, making it impossible to have a meaningful discussion. To make matters worse, Mike had to transfer her. Upon hearing the news, my mother-in-law gleefully suggested, let's put him in a nursing home. But nursing homes are expensive, and she's not working. Given that my father-in-law is physically disabled but still mentally well, is there really a need to put him in a home? After thinking it over many times, I decided to stay behind and continue taking care of my father-in-law. Initially, my mother-in-law made her displeasure quite obvious, but I didn't let that get to me. Despite Mike's concerns, I stood firm in my decision. However, what I didn't realize was how this choice would bring me so much distress. A few months had passed since Mike had started his new assignment elsewhere. On this day, I was going to meet a close friend who lived far away but was visiting town. I had previously informed my in-laws about this and had arranged for my mother-in-law to take care of my father-in-law for the day. However, just as I was getting ready to leave, my mother-in-law came into my room without knocking and said, Michelle, I'm going shopping with a friend right now. Could you please take care of the house and him? Wait, what? I thought I made it clear that you were supposed to take care of my father-in-law today since I'm meeting up with my friend. Oh, is it? I don't remember. That's so unfair. I've told you days before. You're so annoying. I don't know anything about this. Just be grateful that I'm letting you live here, rent-free. But I was really looking forward to meeting my friend after so long. Even a fool like you has a best friend, huh? Birds of a feather flock together. Don't worry. You'll meet them again soon enough. Well, good luck. My mother-in-law hastily left through the door. I broke down crying. Why? Why is it always me? I do the housework and take care of Mike's father every day. Isn't it okay to go out for just one day? This is too much. Just because you hate me, this is too much. A mix of unplaced anger and emptiness overwhelmed me, making it hard to recover. But now that my mother-in-law was out, I had things to do. I wiped away my tears, texted my best friend about what had happened, and got back to the household chores. I prepared the meal for the elderly care and headed towards Mike's father's room. When I knocked and entered the room, Mike's father called out with a serious look. Michelle, my father-in-law, what's the matter? I'm sorry. Because of my wife, your plans got ruined. Ha! Did you hear that earlier? My father-in-law slowly nodded. Then he pulled something out of the drawer next to his bed and handed it to me. My father-in-law, this is. Could you do me a favor in my stead? But are you sure? Yes, I am. It's something I decided a little while ago. Saying that, he pulled out a voice recorder from under his pillow. When the play button was pressed, an unbelievable voice came out. After hearing everything, I promised to fulfill my father-in-law's wish and went to this one place on a later date. But that was the last thing I was able to do for my father-in-law. 2 weeks later, my father-in-law's condition suddenly worsened in the middle of the night. Even though he was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, it was too late and he passed away. My husband, who hurried back from out of state, was not able to be there at the end. Father-in-law, what's the matter? My mother-in-law, who always claimed it was too much of a hassle, left all the arrangements for the wake and funeral to my husband. We held a simple wake just with our close family members, and then the day of the funeral arrived. My father-in-law had started his own company when he was alive and continued to work until the day he collapsed, though he had an extensive network. A large number of people attended the funeral, all showing tears for my father-in-law's death. I exchanged greetings with my father-in-law's acquaintances and waited for the funeral to start. Then my father-in-law, who had been sitting on a chair at the edge, approached me with determination. Michelle, how long do you plan on staying here? Ha! Not ha! Now that his care is done, there's no need for you to be here anymore. Wait, mother-in-law, what are you saying? We don't need you anymore. Strangers should just send their condolences and leave. Without caring about the surrounding eyes, my mother-in-law spit out these words as if making fun of me. At her loud voice, the surrounding people started to murmur. My mother-in-law reached out her hand to me and smirked. Leave your condolence gift and go. At that moment, I felt my blood rush to my head. Who does she think she is? Just leave your condolence gift? We don't need you. This is no joke. How much do you need to insult me to be satisfied? I stepped closer, about to give my mother-in-law a piece of my mind. But the person standing in my way was none other than my husband, Mike. Slowly, with a hard stare at his mother, he began to speak. That's right, Mom. Strangers are a nuisance. My dear son, you think the same, right, Mike? Yeah, I do. So, could you please leave, Mom? You're not my mother anymore. Just take your stuff and go. What? Mike, what are you desperately clinging to her son? My mother-in-law's face tightens into a forced smile. Her voice trembles, her disturbance clearly visible. Mike turns to me, trying to convey something. Understanding his intention, I explain the situation to my mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, no! Margaret, please leave immediately. What did you just say? In your position as a daughter-in-law? I'm no longer your daughter-in-law. I'm a complete stranger. What are you talking about? You're not planning to steal that man's inheritance, are you? You've conspired with him and Mike to do this. No way! All of that man's inheritance is mine. No, it's not anything like that. After all, you're not getting a single penny of the inheritance. With the facts laid out clearly, my mother-in-law stares at me, wide-eyed. For some reason, she grabs my collar and raises her voice. Don't mess with me. Always saying whatever you want. I don't want you deciding the distribution of that man's inheritance. It's your husband's will. Oh, really? And? I don't care about his will. As his wife, I'm guaranteed a share of the inheritance. You won't get it. After all, you're divorced from my father-in-law. What? Yes, my mother-in-law is already divorced from my father-in-law. And I was the one who submitted the divorce papers. That day, my father-in-law showed me his divorce papers. Previously, he had made a pact saying, the next time you commit a misdeed, we'll get a divorce. Out of precaution, he had apparently made my mother-in-law sign the divorce papers. She continued to torment me, even ruining my plans with my best friend. When my father-in-law found out, he was as furious as if it had happened to him. On top of that, she secretly entered my father-in-law's room to steal money, showering him with horrible words like, die already, just pass on and leave the inheritance, etc. These cruel words were recorded by a voice recorder that my father-in-law had hidden by his bedside. Once I finished explaining all of this, the color drained from my mother-in-law's face. In front of her, Mike presented the divorce certification. To my mother-in-law, who was left speechless, I said one last cold sentence. Do you understand? You were long since abandoned by my father-in-law. It's just horrible that you trampled over the feelings of such a kind man. Wait a minute. Without his inheritance, how will I live? You've got to be kidding. Someone as lowly as you have no right to inherit the legacy left by my father-in-law. You should be thankful you've been able to live freely until now. From now on, you'll live a lonely life on a meager social security check. I'll never help you. I hope you suffer more than my father-in-law did when he was sick and struggled to survive. With these words, my former mother-in-law left, crying. The funeral commenced shortly after, but she never returned. After the funeral, I returned home, but she was nowhere to be found. I packed my belongings and moved to my husband's place. Since we deleted my former mother-in-law's number, we have no idea what kind of life she's living now. Even if she were in trouble, we would not help her. Of course, we have no intention of seeing her either. After the move, Mike and I bought a small Christian shrine and decided to place a picture of his father. I started looking for part-time work nearby, and we returned to our dual-income lifestyle. It's busy, but quite fulfilling. Bye, Dad. I'm off now, Mike said. I'm leaving too, father-in-law, I also said and left. Every morning, we do this, paying respects to the picture of Mike's father before we head to work. It seems like the man in the photo is smiling. Oh my, she's sleeping so soundly. My mother-in-law murmured to my daughter, who was dozing off in the back seat, as she parked the car in the outlet mall parking lot. When she turned off the engine, the air conditioning went off too, and the temperature inside the car soared under the scorching sun. My daughter's face turned red, and sweat started to bead on her forehead. Observing this, she gave a creepy grin, stepped out of the car alone, locked it, and went shopping. My name is Olivia, a 31-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Matthew, our daughter Emma, and my in-laws. My in-laws are my quiet father-in-law, James, and my cantankerous mother-in-law, Linda. When we got married, my husband mentioned that he wanted us to live with his parents. His father has mobility issues and requires regular medical visits. Since my mother-in-law is not comfortable driving, my husband has been supporting them by living at their house. I deeply respect my kind-hearted husband. Having grown up with my paternal grandparents, I had no qualms about living in a 3-generation household. However, 5 years ago, when we started living with my in-laws, I realized my assumptions were naive. My mother-in-law is incredibly short-tempered and extremely stingy. She secretly harassed me, earning her the nickname, the Wicked Mother-in-law. She was nothing like my grandmother, with whom I had a harmonious relationship. While I don't know how she treated her daughter-in-law behind closed doors, my grandmother and my mother seemed to get along well. Consequently, I couldn't fathom the real-life battles between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law seen on TV. I used to think, almost as if it were someone else's problem, that there are people going through difficult times. But living with my in-laws shattered my preconceptions. The harassment from my mother-in-law began on day one. She declared, "Since you've stepped into our home, you'll follow all our customs." As a result, I was burdened with all household chores, including preparing meals for my in-laws, cleaning the entire house, providing transportation for hospital visits and outings, and having good relationships with neighbors. Any deviation from my mother-in-law's wishes resulted in later complaints. Desperate to please her, I closely observed her methods and mimicked them. Whenever I tried to enjoy my free time, she would hover behind me, monitoring my every move. My husband, unaware of her true nature, often praised our harmonious relationship. "It's wonderful how well you and Olivia get along," he'd say. We'd both respond with forced smiles. My frequent interactions with neighbors, as per my mother-in-law's orders, led to an increase in acquaintances. Sympathetic neighbors would say, "Isn't your mother-in-law strict and difficult?" Apparently, her wickedness was well known in the neighborhood. Rumor had it that my husband's previous girlfriends had also faced her harassment. Despite being handsome and kind, my husband's undesirable mother made him less appealing to other women. As someone who hadn't known these circumstances, I felt uneasy when I first heard about them. But my father-in-law treated me well, and the real issue was my mother-in-law. If I could endure her harassment, perhaps we could maintain a peaceful life. Or so I thought. Her harassment escalated when my pregnancy was confirmed. Initially, she seemed happy when I shared the news, but the moment she learned it was a girl, her expression turned blatantly disapproving. She said, "Having a girl means she'll eventually leave. She's not worth raising. Quickly, have a boy." I retorted, "Every child born is precious. Besides, we're not obligated to pass on the family business, right? So there's no need to fixate on having a boy." In response, my mother-in-law continued, "Our family has been landowners for generations. Our surname is special. I won't allow our lineage to break because of you." She huffed indignantly. "Honestly, I didn't marry for social status. My husband wasn't concerned about having an heir. In fact, knowing we were having a girl, he eagerly anticipated our daughter's arrival, thinking of toys and celebrating her birth. To him, she was the long-awaited girl." While my mother-in-law grumbled about our daughter, she never directly begged my husband for a son, only when we were alone. In secret, she insisted I produce a son. Her attitude persisted even after our daughter was born. In front of my husband and father-in-law, she doted on our daughter, but when our daughter sought comfort from her, especially on bad days, my mother-in-law would coldly push her away. It was clear she didn't genuinely care for our daughter. "Grandma is scary." As our daughter grew and began speaking, she started avoiding my mother-in-law. One day, my husband noticed this behavior and confronted his mother. "Emma seems afraid of you. You're not treating her poorly, are you?" Panicked at being exposed, my mother-in-law changed her approach. From then on, she actively took our daughter to the park and cared for her at home. However, her harassment toward me intensified. I had grown accustomed to her petty remarks and no longer felt hurt by them. Most importantly, her improved behavior toward our daughter put my mind at ease. As our daughter gradually warmed up to her, I decided to return to work. My husband adjusted his schedule, allowing our daughter to stay with my mother-in-law for a few hours during weekdays. Surprisingly, my father-in-law was thrilled to look after our daughter. Perhaps he influenced my mother-in-law, who reluctantly agreed to care for our daughter. One weekend, an emergency situation arose at work, and I was ordered to work on my day off. Starting now? Understood. I'll head there right away." As I anxiously spoke into the phone, my mother-in-law must have sensed that it was a call from my workplace. She gave me a stern look. My husband had already gone to work, having swapped shifts with a colleague that day. My father-in-law had left early to attend his mentor's son's wedding. I considered finding a temporary place to leave my daughter, Emma, but doing so on the same day seemed impossible. Leaving Emma alone at home for an extended period isn't an option. I need my mother-in-law to look after her. I thought to myself. Just then, my mother-in-law abruptly addressed me. "Don't worry. I'll take Emma to the outlet mall. You go to work. Grandma, let's go." My daughter was overjoyed. I hadn't expected my mother-in-law to volunteer to take care of Emma, so I was pleasantly surprised. After thanking her repeatedly, I reminded Emma to listen to her grandmother. I hurriedly made my way to the office. However, that afternoon, I received an unbelievable phone call. It was the police. He said in a reassuring tone, "Please stay calm. We've taken care of your daughter." Unexpectedly, Emma had been trapped inside a car, but someone found her and rescued her. "Please come to the outlet mall's office immediately." "What's going on?" "If she's being protected, Emma must be safe." I regained my composure and tried to understand the situation. "What's she doing now?" I couldn't reach my mother-in-law. She wasn't answering her phone. Upon arriving at the outlet mall, I headed for the employee entrance. After explaining the situation to the security guard, I was allowed inside. In a room, several police officers stood around a pipe chair where my little daughter sat. Emma noticed me and jumped off the chair, running toward me. "Mom, She had been anxious, surrounded by unfamiliar adults, and was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, I held her tightly, relieved to see her safe. Although it wasn't midsummer, the direct sunlight was scorching. Children's body temperatures are higher than adults, and leaving Emma in the car was unthinkable. If no one had found her, Emma would have been in serious trouble. Imagining the worst, I trembled. I hugged Emma once more. Despite repeatedly calling my mother-in-law, there was still no response. I need to hear the details from her directly, I thought, suspicious of her. I explained to the police that my mother-in-law had been looking after Emma. However, when Emma was discovered, my mother-in-law was nowhere to be found. I became convinced that my mother-in-law intentionally left Emma in the car. Emma couldn't unbuckle her seatbelt or open the car door by herself. If someone hadn't helped her, Emma would have been in serious danger. My anger toward my mother-in-law flared up again. Was she still inside the mall? Let's search the entire store. If we don't find her, we'll head home, I decided. To keep Emma entertained, I bought her juice while we continued our search. The police officer also offered to help, so I thanked them and left the room. Glancing at my phone, I noticed a reply to the email I'd sent my husband 30 minutes earlier. Despite its many mistakes and half-coherent content, it was clear that my husband was quite upset. In my email, I conveyed that our daughter was safe, explained that I would search for my mother-in-law, and requested that he wait at home after work. I didn't want our daughter to see us both upset. For now, I would focus on finding my mother-in-law. We wandered through the store, Emma growing bored. Meanwhile, my shopping-loving mother-in-law disliked driving herself and frequently invited me to accompany her, often on the same day. She would spontaneously decide to go out, causing me to rearrange my existing plans. However, my mother-in-law never expressed an ounce of gratitude for my efforts to adjust my schedule. Oblivious to my concerns, she enjoyed shopping at her own pace. On days like today, when my husband and father-in-law were absent, our daughter joined us. The outlet mall, with its many temptations, became a playground for her whims. Buy this! Buy that! Her demands escalated. Despite having experienced parenthood herself, my mother-in-law seemed baffled by our daughter's behavior. She watched me struggle with a crying child, yet continued shopping at her leisure for 2 or 3 hours. Frustrated by her selfishness, I considered leaving her behind. But then, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "My daughter-in-law abandoned me." She tearfully appealed to the security guard nearby. Although this incident was in the past, recalling it still irritated me. This same self-centered mother-in-law had put our daughter in harm's way today. I can't stay silent about this. I must find my mother-in-law. Determined, I scrutinized the faces of passers-by. Suddenly, our daughter pointed and shouted, "There's Grandma!" I turned to see my mother-in-law, who appeared surprised by my sudden movement. She let out an awkward sound and swiftly changed direction, running away. "Wait, Linda!" She headed toward the parking lot, and I chased after her. Fortunately, the weekend outlet mall was bustling with people, making it impossible for her to escape easily. I never lost sight of her. The mother-in-law seemed to be heading toward her car. I followed her. Just as the car came into view, she noticed something was wrong. She exclaimed, "What is this?" with a terrified expression. To our surprise, the rear window had been shattered and shards of glass were scattered on the ground. Accusingly, she turned to me and grabbed my collar. "You did this!" she accused. I stood my ground, my anger matching hers. "It wasn't me," I retorted. "If it wasn't you, then who would do such a thing? Stop making excuses and compensate immediately," she demanded. Frustrated, I shot back. "In this scorching heat, leaving young Emma alone in the car while you went somewhere, aren't you the one at fault?" I continued. "Do you not know about the news of children left in cars who tragically lost their lives?" My boldness surprised her. I usually behaved modestly. As we argued, bystanders gathered, observing our heated exchange. Realizing she was being watched, she hurriedly got into her car. Remember this. You'll definitely pay for this, she declared before speeding away. The window glass fell to the ground in a cascade. This is dangerous, I thought. Just then, a police officer stopped her car. Out of breath, the officer seemed to have sprinted here. My mother-in-law's expression froze, her earlier determination vanished. She followed the officer's instructions, parking the car in the designated spot. As she stepped out, several officers escorted her away. Emma and her mother, please come with us, the officer instructed. We followed, wondering what would happen next. Until a moment ago, my daughter was sitting in the pipe chair, but now my mother-in-law is sitting there. My daughter seems completely at ease, still asleep in my arms. Why did you leave your granddaughter in the car? One of the police officers calmly and sternly questions my mother-in-law. Never mind that. My car window was broken. If you're the police, catch the culprit. It's probably this woman's doing. My mother-in-law retorts defiantly, pointing at me and glaring at the officer. No, that's not true. Emma's mother didn't break the window. Another customer noticed that she was left inside the car and broke the window to rescue her. Ha! As the police officer explains, my mother-in-law looks surprised, mouth agape. When a couple was getting out of the car to go shopping, they heard Emma crying. They worked together to break the window and rescue Emma. Afterward, they promptly reported it to us. The officer continues to explain about the person who broke the car window. They also mentioned that Emma's body temperature was still relatively normal, considering the time she was left behind. Thanks to that, we were able to respond quickly. We found her mother's contact information from Emma's belongings and immediately reached out to you. Hearing this, tears welled up in my eyes. If those people hadn't noticed Emma, what would have happened to her? But my mother-in-law remains unyielding. I often go shopping alone, you know? So, I just forgot that I had Emma with me. With a feigned expression, my mother-in-law continues. As soon as I realized Emma wasn't there, I tried to go back to the car. But then this woman was holding Emma, and to top it off, my car window was broken. I naturally assumed it was her doing. The police respond to my mother-in-law's blatant lies. Ma'am, please stop lying. There's evidence on the dash cam. When you got out of the car, you spoke to your granddaughter, then closed the curtain and hit the rear seat. It's all recorded. My mother-in-law's expression momentarily darkens. Why are you watching that kind of thing? It's an invasion of privacy. Just because you're the police doesn't mean you can get away with it. She slams her hand on the table. The loud noise wakes up my daughter, so I step out for a moment. Even through the thick walls, I can still hear my mother-in-law shouting. According to the police, the dashcam even recorded my mother-in-law leaning toward the sleeping daughter, saying, "Sleep well, Emma." Given the decisive evidence that remains, it's unlikely that my mother-in-law will escape guilt. After being questioned by the police for a while, my mother-in-law finally reached her limit. It's because that woman gave birth to a girl. We need a boy in our family. She finally confessed the reason for leaving our daughter behind in the car. At that time, we were already back home, so I heard this story later from the police. My shock was immense upon hearing my mother-in-law's true feelings toward our daughter. If I had been there, I might have confronted her without caring about the onlookers. Unfortunately, the chance for revenge against my mother-in-law never came. Why? Because right after that statement, she was taken into custody by the police. She was charged with child abandonment, and her prison sentence was decided. Even now, with the conviction, my mother-in-law stubbornly refuses to go to prison. But unless she changes her feelings toward our daughter, we won't cross paths after she serves her sentence. When I informed my husband, he and my father-in-law both expressed the same opinion. My father-in-law hired a lawyer and presented my mother-in-law with divorce papers. My husband, furious that our daughter had been endangered, declared a complete estrangement from his mother. Left to her own devices after being pushed away by my husband and father-in-law, my mother-in-law wrote letters to all our relatives, pleading for help. But given the gravity of her crime, no one extended a helping hand. After her release, she'll likely spend the rest of her life alone. News of the incident caused quite a stir in the neighborhood, prompting us to decide to move. My father-in-law said, "My wife did something terrible. I apologize for burdening you." He covered the moving expenses from his savings. Meanwhile, my father-in-law sold the house he had lived in for years and decided to live alone near us. My father-in-law said, "Life is just beginning and I'll enjoy a peaceful, solitary existence." His face seemed somewhat relieved. 6 months after moving, we settled into our new home. It was during this time that we discovered I was pregnant with our second child. Freed from my mother-in-law's harassment, we could finally lead a calm life. And the gender of our second child? A boy! But for my husband and me, the child's gender doesn't matter. Our daughter, observing my growing belly, eagerly anticipates having a little brother. She says, "As I'm going to be a big sister soon, I'll help Mom." Her enthusiasm warms my heart. Our nearby father-in-law is also eagerly awaiting the birth of our second child. Knowing he'll continue to care for our children gives us great comfort. From now on, as a family of 4, along with my father-in-law, we hope to lead a happy and